why would you want to deploy Lambdas in Terraform versus using something else? And there's no black and white answer for this. I think the most obvious use case today for Terraform and Lambdas, even using these Dockerized Lambdas, is for your little, and I hate that Amazon created a service called Glue, but, and I'm not referring to Glue, but for your little Glue functions that you got to deploy for things like sending logs from CloudWatch to Datadog or Splunk, or you need to deploy a Lambda, which will connect two different disjoint services in AWS together with each other. In our case, we want to deploy a very simple bot that runs as a Lambda, and would cost essentially nothing to operate and have that going there. We have a Terraform module at Cloud Posse, the SES Lambda forwarder. And it is designed to forward emails that come into SES. You'd think that would just be built-in functionality. Well, maybe it is today, I don't know. But when we wrote this module, there was no way to do it other than having a Lambda. So this would be another perfect use case of having a Docker image to distribute that functionality. The other example is Slack notifications. We have a Slack notification module. I think this one is one of the very few modules that wraps a AWS community module to send Slack notifications. Another use case of just, if we just had that Docker image for the Lambda, it'd be very easy to go. Now, where I'm less convinced it is necessarily the best option is, okay, your organization is very mature in serverless. You have 500 functions, and we're saying you got to use Terraform for that. Yeah, I don't know. You're probably using a better framework than Terraform for it. You're probably using serverless or CDK or something. I'm not going to say that you got to switch to this. So choose the right tool for the job.
I guess the other argument for it is that what you can do is, if you have a CICD pipeline that for all of your applications does a build process and creates an artifact, and then you store that artifact somewhere, and that is your build process, and then you have a separate deployment process that takes artifacts and launches them in different environments at different times. Being able to create a Lambda function as a Docker image and being able to launch a particular version of that function in an environment and then promote that same version to multiple different environments is actually something very desirable for people who care about those types of things across their organization, not just for the functions themselves, but for if that's the process they use for everything, including content, including other applications that might be interacting with them, doing an orchestrated deploy of versioned artifacts actually makes a lot more sense, where the by default, I'll at least say serverless and the other frameworks don't exactly do that. You kind of usually do like a serverless deploy, and it just launches your latest version like to an environment for you, and then you don't necessarily have the artifact that you can promote as easily. I know there are ways around that, but just thinking it through, there's just it's just a slightly different view on how to actually do deployments to Lambdas.
Or Amara shared an example of the Terraform AWS modules, which is totally unaffiliated with Cloud Posse. But I believe this part of this module and its approach to Lambdas has historically been to build, to use local exec to build things. But,
yep, it's being built in a Docker container, and you can also just give it a path to a zip. And I think also a Docker image. I haven't used it with a Docker image.
Yeah. So, and I believe it leans on has some Python behind the scenes to help manage all of this. And this is why I just don't like the approach in Terraform to kind of break that boundary that Terraform is now running scripts and things.
Yeah, and you also can get, well, I guess if what Vlad just said was true, maybe it's not as big of a deal, but I think a previous version of this used to just build the zip. And then you have the problem where, like, if you're running this on a Mac and you're deploying it to to a Linux box, you might not get the right versions of your dependencies and those kind of things. Also, like if you're building, let's say, like a JavaScript application, you have to include like node modules and all those types of things. So you got to make sure that it's not just the single like function that you need to include. It's also all the dependencies and all those things, which is perfect for what your build process should be doing. And it's really hard to capture that properly within Terraform. At least that's been my experience over the years.
I don't know. That's been my experience whenever I've used this module. And I think that the one escape route for those of you using it that I wanted to mention, because I can I immediately agree with Matt's thoughts on it, that it just like kind of creates this bad build cycle. But then the thing that you can turn on, which I've done, is for usages of this module, is you can enable it so it gets deployed from S3, and then your CI process can build and push to S3, and that way you're not building via this Python script that Eric has up. You can still involve your CI process, and it's a way to get around some of the ugliness in this module. But there's so many options and so much going on here that there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, so to speak.
Yep, and that's basically the same approach that we've taken with the new module that we launched, is that your CI process builds the artifact and deploys it somewhere, and then the Lambda module grabs that artifact and launches it as a Lambda. So I like that breaking those two in half, whether it's our module or Anton's module or whatever like that. I really hate the idea of building Lambdas within Terraform. It just causes so many problems.
Agreed. And I would say I'm excited for what you folks have made in terms of it being like Docker first approach seems the right way to do things, because then you don't have different ways of building your artifacts like you were talking about earlier. You have one always, you're always building images. That's whatever code you're deploying, it's in an image, and that feels cohesive, and that's important.
Yeah, I like that. And we've been using a lot of composite actions lately. So now we just have a composite action for how we do Docker builds, and we can reuse that even for the Lambdas now. It'll be just the same every time.